The Metropolitan Opera House lights dimmed as Victoria Ashford's fingers danced across the Steinway concert grand. But something was wrong. Marcus Chin stood in the shadows backstage, a cleaning rag still clutched in his hand from wiping down the practice rooms. He'd heard that particular Rachmaninoff passage 10,000 times during his years at the conservatory, and his trained ear caught what the audience of 800 couldn't detect. The slight delay, the mechanical perfection that only comes from a pre-recorded track blending seamlessly with live performance. Victoria's hands moved beautifully across the keys, but the sound wasn't entirely hers. Marcus had been cleaning these halls for 3 years now, ever since that night when everything fell apart. Once, he'd been the most promising student at the Manhattan Conservatory, the young pianist everyone whispered about in hushed, reverent tones. His interpretation of Liszt's La Campanella had professors comparing him to the greats. His ability to navigate the most technically demanding pieces with ease that seemed almost supernatural. Then his father collapsed during a performance Marcus was giving at Carnegie Hall. A massive stroke. Marcus left mid-recital, ran straight to the hospital, and never looked back. The critics called it unprofessional. The conservatory revoked his scholarship. Victoria Ashford, then a fellow student and now one of the world's most celebrated pianists, had given a single interview where she said those who abandon their art and moment of greatness don't deserve to return to it. Marcus's father survived but needed round-the-clock care. Insurance covered almost nothing. Marcus found work as a cleaner at the Opera House, the same venue where Victoria now performed regularly to sold-out crowds. His son, Daniel, was 7 years old and had been diagnosed with a degenerative neurological condition that would eventually take his ability to walk, then to speak. The experimental treatment that might slow the progression cost $93,000. Insurance denied it as investigational. Marcus worked double shifts, sleeping 4 hours a night, saving every penny. He needed $58,000 more within the month, or the window for treatment would close. But Marcus never stopped playing. Late at night, after everyone left, he'd slip into the empty practice rooms and play on the old upright piano relegated to the storage area. His fingers still knew every passage, every phrase, every impossible leap that separated competent pianists from transcendent ones. Daniel would sometimes sit on the bench beside him, eyes closed, swaying to the music. "Daddy's playing makes my head feel quiet," Daniel once said. The neurologist had noticed it too. During Marcus's playing, Daniel's brain activity showed unusual patterns of calm, as if the music was somehow reaching past the disease to touch something fundamental. Nobody could explain it, but Marcus knew it wasn't technique or brilliance. It was love, the only medicine he could still afford to give his son. Tonight, Victoria was hosting a gala concert called Notes for Children, supposedly raising funds for pediatric neurology research at Mount Sinai Hospital, the same condition Daniel had. Marcus had signed the consent forms months ago, allowing them to use Daniel's photo in promotional materials. The irony wasn't lost on him. Victoria stepped onto the stage in a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than Marcus earned in 6 months. She smiled at the audience, 800 people who'd paid $500 per ticket. That alone was $400,000. "Tonight," Victoria announced, her voice carrying the practice warmth of someone accustomed to adoration, "I will perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. The final cadenza, the passage to C-sharp major, has defeated every pianist who's attempted to accept me. That's why I stand here. That's why I can help these children." The applause was thunderous. Marcus watched from the wings as the rehearsal began earlier that afternoon. He'd been cleaning the mirrors in the green room when Victoria came in to warm up. The orchestra played the opening measures. Victoria's playing was solid through the first 2 movements, exactly what you'd expect from years of technical training and performance experience. But when she reached the cadenza, the notorious passage that Rachmaninoff himself could barely play, Marcus heard the strain. Her shoulders tensed. Her breathing became visible. The notes were there, but they were forced, manufactured. Then she stopped abruptly. "My hands are cold," she said to her accompanist. "Bring up the backing track, just for support during the difficult sections." Marcus froze. He watched the sound engineer adjust levels. Victoria played to the cadenza again, and this time it sounded perfect. Too perfect. The resonance had that slight digital sheen, the way notes from a speaker sit on top of the acoustic space rather than breathing within it. Marcus knew immediately. The recording wasn't supporting her playing. It was replacing it. He thought about Daniel watching the live stream from his hospital bed, believing that this woman was a genius who cared about children like him. He thought about the money, about where it really went. That's when he looked up the previous galas Victoria had hosted, a small article buried in the archives of Music Journal. Only 22% of funds from notes for children reach medical research. The remaining 78% goes to administrative costs, marketing, and something called artist development fees. 22% of $400,000 meant $88,000 would actually help children. The rest was funding Victoria's career, her publicity, her brand as a philanthropist. Something ignited in Marcus's chest. Not anger, but a quiet certainty that he couldn't let this continue. The evening performance began at 8. 800 people filled the Opera House. 3.2 million watched the live stream. Marcus finished his shift and prepared to leave through the service exit. But as he reached the backstage corridor, he stopped. On stage, Victoria swept into view, the lights catching the crystals on her gown. "Tonight isn't just about music," she told the audience, her voice heavy with manufactured emotion. "It's about hope. It's about giving children like these a fighting chance." The screen behind her showed children's faces, medical equipment, brave smiles despite suffering. Daniel's photo appeared, his thin face and huge eyes staring out at millions of people. Every ticket sold tonight goes directly to saving these children's lives. Marcus stared at his son's face on that massive screen and knew he couldn't walk away. He couldn't let Victoria keep lying while Daniel and hundreds of children like him suffered. Victoria performed the first 3 pieces perfectly. Chopin, Debussy, Beethoven. All flawless, all technically immaculate, all slightly mechanical. Then she announced the Rachmaninoff. This concerto represents the absolute pinnacle of piano performance. The cadenza requires strength, precision, and emotional depth that few will ever achieve. The orchestra began. Victoria's hands moved across the keys with practiced grace. The first movement was impressive, the second movement beautiful. Then came the cadenza, the impossible passage that separates the competent from the legendary. The notes rang out, crystalline and perfect, every impossible leap executed with precision. But Marcus heard it clearly now, standing in the wings. That wasn't Victoria Ashford playing. That was a recording, mixed so perfectly with her live performance that only someone with years of conservatory training could detect the difference. Something broke loose inside Marcus. 5 years of silence, of accepting his place, of believing he'd lost his right to the music he loved. He stepped out of the shadows. No plan, no preparation, just a man in a maintenance uniform carrying 3 years of suppressed truth. Victoria saw him. Her eyes narrowed in recognition. The scholarship student who'd abandoned his career, now reduced to mopping her dressing room. A cold smile appeared on her lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria said, her microphone amplified her voice across the hall. "We have an unexpected guest." 800 heads turned. 3.2 million people watching online, suddenly focused on a thin man in gray coveralls. "Marcus Chun," Victoria continued, and her tone carried just enough condescension to wound without seeming cruel. "Some of you may remember him from the conservatory scandal 5 years ago. Such promise, such potential." She paused deliberately, until he walked away from his Carnegie Hall debut, just left the stage. No explanation, no apology. The murmuring began immediately. Marcus felt heat rise in his face. "My father was dying," Marcus said quietly, but his microphone picked it up. Victoria either didn't hear or chose not to acknowledge it. And now look at him, cleaning up after successful musicians. How touching. A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the audience. Victoria gestured to the piano. "Come, play something for us. Show everyone what becomes of wasted talent." Every instinct screamed at Marcus to leave, to escape, to return to the safety of invisibility. But if he walked away now, Victoria would win. She would continue profiting from children's suffering, continue lying, and Daniel would grow up thinking his father was a coward. Marcus walked onto the stage. Each step felt impossibly heavy. The Steinway gleamed under the lights. $2 million of perfectly crafted instrument. He cleaned this piano 100 times but never played it. Make yourself comfortable, Victoria said with false warmth. Do your best. Before sitting, Marcus turned to the sound engineer. Can you turn off the backing tracks? The entire auditorium went silent. Victoria's smile froze. The tracks are part of the orchestral arrangement, Marcus. During rehearsal, you played without them, Marcus said quietly. You played alone. The murmuring spread faster now, speculation crackling through the crowd. Sound check is different from performance, Victoria replied, her voice tightening. Then could you play first? Marcus continued. Just you, no tracks. So I can learn from you. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Victoria laughed, sharp and brittle. You want me to audition for you? No, Marcus replied. I want to know if you can actually play it. The opera house erupted in gasps, shocked whispers. Victoria stared at Marcus as if he'd struck her. Of course I can play it, she said through clenched teeth. Then prove it. Victoria spun toward the sound engineer. Kill the tracks. All of them. The engineer hesitated, looking between Victoria and his equipment. Do it, she hissed. He pressed several buttons. The rich, full sound orchestra suddenly became sparse, stripped down to only the live instruments. Nowhere to hide. Victoria positioned herself at the piano, fingers poised above the keys. She began the cadenza. For the first several measures, she was magnificent, years of training evident in every carefully controlled movement. The audience started to relax, thinking perhaps the cleaning man had been mistaken. But as the passage climbed higher, as the technical demands increased, something changed. Her shoulders rose. Her neck tensed. The fluidity became forced. Then she reached for the impossible sequence, the passage that gives the piece its legendary difficulty. Her fingers stumbled. The notes came out muddled, approximately correct, but missing the clarity and power that makes the passage breathtaking. She pushed through, but when she attempted the final resolution, her hands simply couldn't execute it. The sound shattered into dissonance. Victoria stopped abruptly, cleared her throat, took a sip of water. As I mentioned, one must protect the voice during long performances. That's precisely why we use enhancement tracks. But on your recording, you play that passage 73 times, Marcus said, his voice steady. I counted, and in every concert video online, it's perfect, every single time. The audience stirred, phones rising, people exchanging glances. What exactly are you implying? Victoria's voice became sharp as a blade. I have perfect pitch, Marcus said. I can identify frequencies. That final sequence requires hitting notes at 4,434 hertz. What you just played was 4,186 hertz. You missed it by a major third. Someone in the audience shouted, Is that true? Victoria's face flushed. And the recording, Marcus continued, no longer holding back, doesn't sound like you. The timbre is different. The attack is different. I checked the album credits. It lists someone named Elena Volkov as additional piano on 5 tracks, including this one. The opera house exploded. Journalists typed frantically. Audience members pulled up the album credits on their phones. Cameras abandoned their fixed positions. Victoria strode toward Marcus, grabbing his arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to control. That's enough, she whispered. But before she could drag him off stage, a voice rang out from the wings. He's right. Everyone turned. Thomas Park, Victoria's longtime recording engineer, stepped into the light. His face was pale, but his expression was resolute. I've engineered Victoria's recordings for 7 years, Thomas said. She's never successfully performed at Cadenza Live. Not once. Every performance, every concert, I've mixed an Elena Volkov's recording. Absolute silence descended. Victoria stared at Thomas as if he destroyed her entire world. You're finished, she whispered. I know, Thomas replied. But he's a father raising a sick child alone, cleaning toilets to afford treatment. And he's had more courage in one night than I've had in 7 years. The silence in the opera house was deafening. 800 people sat frozen. 3.2 million watched online as Victoria Ashford's career disintegrated in real time. Victoria found her voice, shaking with rage. "You're insane. I have 3 Grammys. I performed in 17 countries. And you expect people to believe a janitor over me? Then prove us wrong," someone shouted from the balcony. "Play it again." Victoria's face went from red to white. "I just played it." "No," another voice called. "You crashed. We all heard it." The crowd was turning. Victoria looked at Marcus, and something cold and calculating appeared in her eyes. "Fine," she said. "You think you're so talented? You play. Right now. No warm-up, no preparation, no second chances." Marcus's hands trembled. This was the moment that would either vindicate 5 years of silence or prove Victoria right about him being a failure. From the audience, a weathered voice called out, "You can do this, Marcus." Marcus turned. Robert Sullivan, the 70-year-old maintenance supervisor who'd given Marcus the job 3 years ago, was standing. He began to clap slowly, deliberately. "Play the way you play for Daniel." Marcus closed his eyes, took a breath, felt his diaphragm expand, felt every lesson and every loss settle into his bones. He opened his eyes and nodded to the conductor. "Rachmaninoff 3, from the cadenza." The orchestra began. Marcus placed his hands on the keys, and for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't cleaning, wasn't surviving, wasn't hiding. He was home. The opening phrases emerged tentative, almost cautious. He focused on the story the music was telling, the emotional architecture beneath the notes. A few audience members exchanged uncertain glances. He played well, certainly, but nothing extraordinary yet. Then the cadenza began to climb. Marcus's hands opened up, power increasing without losing control. There was something raw in his playing, something honest that Victoria's technical perfection could never capture. He wasn't performing. He was testifying. The melody continued rising. His fingers navigated passages that would destroy most pianists with ease that seemed almost casual. No visible strain, no tension, just fluid motion like water finding its path. Victoria shifted in her seat, jaw tightening. Then Marcus reached the notorious passage where Victoria had failed. He didn't hesitate. His hands moved across the keys with absolute confidence, the impossible leaps executed with precision that seemed to violate physics. The sound that emerged was crystalline, powerful, each note distinct yet flowing seamlessly into the next. Someone in the front row gasped. Marcus held the most difficult sequence for 12 measures, every note perfect, building to a crescendo that made the entire opera house feel too small to contain it. Then he pushed higher, into a variation that even Rachmaninoff's original score didn't include, his own interpretation that demonstrated a level of virtuosity that left the audience breathless. He brought the cadenza back down to the registers, each transition seamless, each phrase a small revelation. When he completed the final resolution, landing perfectly on the C-sharp major chord that gives a piece its name, the piano seemed to sing. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the opera house erupted. 800 people leaped to their feet, shouting, applauding, some openly weeping. Robert jumped up and down, both arms raised. The orchestra members stood, clapping without stopping. The live stream chat scrolled so fast it became unreadable. Within 60 seconds, 90,000 shares. Within 2 minutes, Marcus Chin Pianist was a #1 trending topic globally. Marcus stood under the lights, breathing hard, barely able to process what had just happened. Victoria Ashford looked like she'd been struck by lightning. From the front row, a woman stood. Patricia Morrison, a legendary concert pianist and guest of honor, was crying. "That is the most extraordinary thing I've heard in 40 years, Patricia said, her voice breaking. From a janitor, the applause grew even louder. Gregory Walsh, a producer who'd worked with Yo-Yo Ma and Lang Lang, shook his head in disbelief. "I need to say something," he announced, standing. "I've been in classical music for 35 years. Tonight we just watched a maintenance worker play a piece that the woman who made it famous truly cannot perform." The auditorium fell deadly silent. Gregory turned to face the audience. "I mixed Victoria's Grammy-winning album. Marcus is right. That's not her playing the cadenza. It's Elena Volkov, a session pianist from Moscow. Elena was paid $4,000 and forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. She was never properly credited. Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. I stayed silent, Gregory continued, his voice heavy with regret. Because that's what we do in this industry. Protect the star, protect the money, protect the machine. But I'm done protecting lives. Especially when a janitor has shown more courage than I've had in 3 decades. The opera house erupted again. Journalists abandoned any pretense of objectivity and rushed toward the stage. Cameras swarmed. Victoria finally found her voice, screaming to be heard over the chaos. This is insane. Everyone uses backing tracks. It's Sock Perlman uses tracks. But they don't claim to be performing live. Patricia Morrison shot back. They don't sell tickets for performances they can't deliver. That's fraud, Victoria. I never, Victoria stammered, looking desperately for support. But her accompanist had turned away. Her manager was on his phone, probably with lawyers. Victoria turned to Marcus, and in that moment he saw not just anger but genuine fear. You will regret this, Victoria said, her voice low but captured perfectly by every microphone. Your sick child, your pathetic little life. I promise you'll never play professionally again. Never. The threat hung in the air, recorded by every camera, heard by millions. But Marcus was no longer afraid. I don't play professionally, Marcus replied quietly. I play because I love it, because it keeps my son alive in ways medicine can't. And you can't take that from me. He paused, then added clearly, deliberately, but maybe it's time someone took it from you. The silence was absolute. Then a single person began clapping. Slow, deliberate. Then another. Within seconds, all 800 people were standing again, applauding not Victoria Ashford, but father who refused to stay silent. Victoria looked around at the wreckage of everything she'd built. Without another word, she turned and walked off stage. The moment she disappeared into the wings, the opera house erupted one final time. The aftermath moved with terrifying speed. Within 5 minutes, Victoria Ashford fraud was trending globally. 10 minutes later, her Wikipedia page was edited. 15 minutes after that, major music publications ran headlines. Celebrated pianist exposed by Janitor. 20 minutes in, 3 major sponsors released statements, suspending partnerships pending investigation. Marcus remained backstage, sitting on a folding chair, surrounded by chaos he created by simply telling the truth. Robert sat beside him. Around them, adults whispered urgently. Event organizers, Victoria's management, lawyers in expensive suits speaking rapidly into phones. Nobody spoke to Marcus directly. His phone buzzed. The hospital. Daniel had watched the live stream from his bed. Daddy, I saw you play. It was so beautiful. Everyone here is crying. Marcus's throat tightened. Are you okay, buddy? I'm okay, Daddy. The nurses watched too. They said you were incredible. That call had been 2 hours ago. Now it was nearly midnight. The opera house had emptied except for crew members dismantling equipment. Marcus was still sitting on that folding chair, uncertain what came next. Then Victoria's attorney appeared. Catherine Sterling, mid-50s, wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus's annual salary. Leather briefcase, cold smile. Mr. Chun, she said, pulling up a chair. I'm Catherine Sterling, representing Ms. Ashford. Robert stood immediately, positioning himself protectively. He doesn't have legal representation present. If this is formal discussion, I suggest— Of course not, Catherine interrupted smoothly. I'm simply here to resolve an unfortunate misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Marcus said quietly. Your client can't play the music that made her famous. That's fraud. Catherine's smile didn't waver. The music industry is complex, Mr. Chun. Artists use technical support, studio enhancement, production assistance. It's standard practice. Tonight was merely a misinterpretation of professional context. She lied, Marcus replied. And I understand that, Catherine said, opening her briefcase, which is why Ms. Ashford would like to offer you something. She placed documents on a small table. If you sign this, everything disappears. Marcus picked up the papers. read carefully. His expression didn't change. This was a settlement offer disguised as an apology. It stated that Marcus had made false accusations, that he'd been seeking attention, that he regretted any harm caused to Ms. Ashford's reputation. In return, Victoria would not pursue legal action. As a gesture of goodwill, she would establish a $150,000 music scholarship in Marcus's name and separately provide $93,000 for Daniel's medical treatment. $243,000. Enough to save Daniel, enough to change everything. If I don't sign, Marcus asked. Catherine's smile faded. Ms. Ashford will pursue defamation charges against you, against anyone who repeats your allegations, and against the Opera House for creating a hostile environment. She paused. We're also aware your son's hospital has a significant building renovation to pen on a $700,000 donation from Ms. Ashford's foundation. That donation is now under review. Robert's fists clenched. Marcus looked at the papers, at the signature line that would label him a liar. He thought of Daniel in that hospital bed, of $93,000, of treatment in 2 weeks or possibly never. Then he thought of the truth. No, Marcus said. Catherine blinked. Excuse me, I'm not signing. I didn't lie. She did. I won't say otherwise just because she's rich and I'm not. Mr. Chun, Catherine's voice turned cold. I don't think you understand the consequences. I understand you're threatening my sick child, Marcus replied. Go ahead and sue me, but I'm not signing that paper. Catherine's face hardened. Then I'll see you in court. She gathered her briefcase. Before leaving, she turned back one final time. By morning, there will be stories about you, about your past, your family, difficult things. When it gets worse, and it will, remember you chose this. She left. Robert didn't offer empty comfort. The two men simply sat in silence. Finally, Robert spoke. You sure? Marcus nodded. That scholarship, that money, I can't teach Daniel that truth has a price. That fear can buy silence. His voice steadied. I gave up my career 5 years ago to be with my father when he needed me. People said I was wrong, but my father, even dying, told me he was proud of me. For Daniel, that's enough. Then we fight, Robert said simply. The next morning, Marcus woke to his phone vibrating like something alive. 6 a.m., 3 hours of sleep. The screen was flooded with notifications. He opened Twitter. The first thing he saw was a photo of their apartment building in Queens. Peeling paint, rusted fire escape, garbage bins overflowing. The caption, "This is where Marcus Chin lives," while accusing Victoria Ashford. Clearly desperate to escape poverty. The next post showed Marcus accepting a free meal at a community center 5 years ago. Living off charity his whole life. This was never about truth. It was about money. The comments were vicious. People like this always want handouts. He should be grateful Victoria gave him attention. By noon, the smear campaign was everywhere. Coordinated articles appeared simultaneously. Sources close to the Chun family claim Marcus orchestrated the incident as an extortion scheme. No evidence, no verification, published anyway. By afternoon, Victoria's legal team officially filed an $8 million lawsuit. Not just against Marcus, but against Elena Volkov, against Thomas Park, against anyone who'd spoken the truth. $8 million meant to terrify, to crush, to silence. By 4 p.m., new stories emerged. Sources claim Marcus Chin has substance abuse issues. His family history includes violence. They're playing victims to extract settlement money. None of it was true. By 5, another outlet claimed confirmation that Daniel's condition was exaggerated for sympathy. Marcus sat on their worn sofa, watching lies multiply like bacteria. His phone trembled in his hand. Then at 7:30 that evening, something changed. Elena Volkov posted a video. She appeared to be in her 40s, sitting in a Moscow recording studio, gold records visible on the walls. My name is Elena Volkov, she said in accented English. I am a session pianist. I am the person who played Rachmaninoff's Concerto No. 3 on Victoria Ashford's Grammy-winning album. Marcus's heart pounded. That man told the truth 2 nights ago. I recorded the cadenza Victoria cannot perform. I was paid $4,000 and forced to sign papers saying I would never speak about it. I stayed silent while a janitor was being destroyed for exposing what I was too afraid to say. The video had been posted 12 minutes earlier. Already 600,000 views. Within 3 hours, 8 million. Within 6 hours, 11 other session musicians came forward. Each had contracts, recordings, emails. Each confirmed that Victoria Ashford had been using the performances and crediting herself for 17 years. By the next morning, public opinion had completely reversed. Victoria Ashford fraud reached 100 million impressions. This time not speculation, evidence. But Victoria didn't surrender quietly. Despite overwhelming proof, despite 11 musicians confirming the truth, Victoria's legal team moved forward with the lawsuit. $8 million. The strategy wasn't to win. It was to bankrupt everyone who'd oppose her into silence. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, gripping the summons. He'd lost enough to know that survival required fighting with reason, not just emotion. His phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Chen? My name is Jennifer Torres. I'm an attorney. I'd like to represent you pro bono. Marcus straightened. Why? Because what you did was right. And because the legal system shouldn't be weaponized by the wealthy to silence truth-tellers. She paused. But this is your decision. You're a father. This is your life. I can only offer legal guidance. Marcus looked at the summons. If we fight, can we win? Jennifer didn't deflect. Legally, we have an excellent case. But Victoria has resources and time. She can extend this for years, drain you financially and emotionally. This won't be easy. That's what I needed to know, Marcus said. Not comfort. Truth. Let's do it. Within an hour, his kitchen table was covered with files. Jennifer worked efficiently. Victoria's lawsuit is nonsense. Defamation requires false statements. Everything you said is provably true. She knows it. This is intimidation. So, what do? We countersue. Fraud, false advertising, breach of consumer protection laws. We turn this into a class action representing everyone who bought tickets to her concerts. Make it so expensive she can't continue. But the next morning, everything became infinitely worse. For a.m., Daniel woke struggling to breathe. His lips had a bluish tint. Marcus slammed the call button, heart thundering. Doctors rushed in. Oxygen, machines, medical terminology Marcus barely comprehended. Neurological decline accelerating. Need to operate immediately. They stabilized Daniel, but Dr. Richardson pulled Marcus aside in the hallway. We're out of time. Daniel needs surgery within the week, possibly sooner. The procedure is 14 hours. Even with success, the risks are significant. Marcus sat alone in the waiting room after Daniel fell back asleep. Nowhere to go. He held his phone. Catherine Sterling's number was still in his recent calls. One call. Accept the deal. Sign the papers. Save Daniel. His finger hovered over the button. The waiting room door opened quietly. Daniel appeared, small and fragile in his hospital gown, dragging in 4-pole. Daddy. Marcus quickly wiped his eyes. I'm here, buddy. Are you scared? Daniel climbed onto the chair beside Marcus. Marcus took a breath. Very scared. But you still told the truth about that lady. Yes. Mommy always said being scared but doing the right thing anyway is what brave means. Daniel looked up with eyes that understood more than a 7-year-old should. So you're brave. In that moment, Marcus knew he couldn't call Catherine Sterling. He couldn't teach his son that truth could be purchased with fear. Your mommy was the bravest person I knew, Marcus whispered, and you're the second bravest. Daniel shook his head firmly. No, you are. Marcus held his son gently. Daniel wasn't just a child he was protecting. This small boy was giving him strength. That wasn't weakness. That was love. That's why he could never sign those papers. The courtroom was smaller than expected. New York County Supreme Court, Part 47. About 40 people in the gallery, mostly journalists and supporters who'd lined up at dawn. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table with 7 attorneys in suits that screamed money. She wore a navy jacket, her face composed in an expression of wounded dignity. Marcus sat between Jennifer Torres and Robert. He wore the only dress shirt he owned, borrowed tie from Robert. This wasn't the full trial yet, just a preliminary hearing on Victoria's motion for an emergency injunction to silence Marcus, Elena, and Thomas from making further statements. Judge Margaret Okonkwo entered, late 50s, 23 years on the bench. She glanced at Victoria's legal army, then at Marcus, and something flickered across her face. "Ms. Sterling," the judge said to Victoria's lead attorney, "you're seeking a gag order against a maintenance worker. Your Honor, the defendant's occupation doesn't diminish the damage caused by false statements." "Are they false?" Judge Okonkwo interrupted. "That is precisely yes or no, counsel." Catherine Sterling hesitated. "Those statements were made with malicious intent to destroy my client's reputation and livelihood." "That's not what I asked. Do you have evidence that Mr. Chen's statements are false?" "Your Honor, the music industry routinely uses technical enhancement. Not what I asked." The judge cut in. "Yes or no?" Catherine's jaw tightened. "We believe the context has been misrepresented." "So that's a no." Judge Okonkwo made a note. "Ms. Torres, do you have evidence supporting your client's statements?" "Yes, Your Honor." "I'd like to call Elena Volkov." Elena took the stand, was sworn in. Jennifer guided her through the testimony methodically, the contract showing Elena recorded the cadenza, the NDAs preventing her from receiving credit, the emails explicitly instructing that her contribution remain secret. "Ms. Volkov," Jennifer asked, "when you heard Marcus Chin state that Victoria Ashford could not perform that passage, what did you think?" "I thought, finally someone said it." "And was he correct?" "Completely correct." Jennifer sat. Catherine stood to cross-examine, but Judge Okonkwo raised her hand. "I've heard enough." The judge turned directly toward Victoria. "Ms. Ashford, I'm going to ask you one question. You're not on the stand, but you are under oath in this courtroom." The room held its breath. "Can you perform cadenza at issue?" Victoria's face went pale. "Your Honor, I fail to see the relevance." "Highly relevant. You're asking this court to silence people claiming you cannot perform this piece. Prove them wrong. Play it." Absolute silence. Victoria looked at her lawyers, at the judge, at Marcus. My hands haven't been warmed up." "You performed on demand for 17 years. Judge Okonkwo said evenly. Surely you can demonstrate it once." Victoria's mouth opened, closed. Not a single sound emerged. "Just as I thought." Judge Okonkwo struck her gavel. "The motion for injunction is denied. Furthermore, the court sanctions a plaintiff for filing a frivolous action designed to silence truthful speech." The gavel came down again. "Mr. Chun, you are free to continue telling your story. That's called the First Amendment. It protects truth even when truth is inconvenient." Outside the courthouse, a reporter from 60 Minutes was waiting. "Marcus, how do you feel?" "Like I can breathe again." That evening, the 60 Minutes segment aired. 23 million viewers. During the closing segment, Victoria's remaining sponsors withdrew. Her record label terminated her contract. Her upcoming concert series was canceled. The Recording Academy announced a formal review of her awards. A career built on 17 years of deception collapsed because one father refused to stay silent. But Marcus's real victory came 3 days later. 3 days after the hearing, Marcus's phone rang at 6 a.m. A known number. "Mr. Chun, this is the office of Renee Fleming. Ms. Fleming would like to cover all medical expenses for your son. The full $93,000. Marcus sat up in bed, couldn't speak, tears falling before he could process what he'd heard. But that was only the beginning. Within 24 hours, Joshua Bell called offering to fund all post-surgery rehabilitation. Hillary Hahn tweeted a fundraising appeal that raised $307,000 in 9 hours. Daniels Hospital held an emergency board meeting and voted unanimously to publicly support Marcus. They rejected Victoria's threatened $700,000 donation. The most important moment, though, came from something quieter. Daniel's surgery was scheduled for the following week. Dr. Richardson explained everything without evasion. 14-hour procedure, 20% risk of complications. But without surgery, Daniel wouldn't live to see his 10th birthday. The morning of the operation, Marcus sat by Daniel's bed as nurses prepared him. "Daddy," Daniel's voice was small. "I'm here, buddy. I'm scared." "Me too. But you stood up for what's right even when you were scared." Daniel looked up at his father. "That makes it less scary." Marcus smiled through tears. "You taught me that. Every single day you taught me how to be brave. Will you play for me, Daddy?" Marcus sang as they wheeled Daniel toward the operating room. He sang until the doors closed, then collapsed into a waiting room chair. The next 14 hours were the longest of Marcus's life. At hour 12, he started thinking of every moment he wanted to play piano but couldn't because fear crushed his chest. At hour 14, the operating room doors opened. Dr. Richardson emerged, masked down, exhausted but smiling. Surgery was successful. Daniel's prognosis is excellent. Marcus broke. 5 years of fear released in a single redemptive moment. Daniel was going to be okay. 3 hours later, Daniel woke in recovery. Marcus sat beside him, holding his small hand. "Daddy," Daniel whispered, "I'm here. Did you play for me? Do you want to hear it now? Your playing makes my head quiet." So Marcus sang right there in the recovery room, nurses stopping to listen. He sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, voice rough from years of silence, but beautiful because it was real, because it was alive, because it was love. When the song ended, Daniel smiled and fell back asleep. For the first time in 5 years, Marcus felt something unlock in his chest. His music had returned, not for stages or glory, but for his son. 18 months later, Marcus stood backstage at the Metropolitan Opera House. But this time, he wasn't carrying a mop. He was returning as a performing artist. Daniel, now 9, healthy and bright, sat front row wearing a shirt that read "My dad's hand saved me." The auditorium was full. Not 800 wealthy patrons with $500 tickets, but 2,000 working people who'd lined up early. Janitors, nurses, teachers, single parents. People who'd been told they didn't matter. Marcus opened with a piece he'd composed called "Silent No More." His playing wasn't technically perfect. There were still traces of 5 years away. But it was honest. For the second piece, he invited Elena Volkov on stage. Together they performed Rachmaninoff's Third. And when they both reached the cadenza, playing in perfect synchronization, the opera house erupted. For the final piece, Marcus called Daniel onto the stage. "This is my son. 2 years ago, I almost lost him. In that fear, I found my voice again. Not for fame, for love." They played together. A duet Marcus had written. Marcus looked out at the audience and spoke his final words. "To everyone who was ever told to stay quiet, you're not invisible anymore.